Othello, for iHearShakespeare. Shakespeare's Othello, written in 1603 or 1604, holds similarities with The Merchant of Venice in that a secondary character becomes much of the focus of the play, due to his compelling nature. Those characters are Shylock in The Merchant of Venice and Iago in Othello. Indeed, much of the criticism is bound to focus on these secondary figures in order to examine the primary character's motives and actions. Iago is one of Shakespeare's most perfectly immoral characters. He is extremely intelligent, resourceful, and flexible in the sense that he is able to seamlessly, flawlessly, and in the moment, manipulate any situation to his advantage as it unfolds. All Iago needs, then, are targets, and there are plenty of targets in the play, including Roderigo, Cassio, Desdemona, and Othello himself. Othello is, of course, the most desirable target since Iago worships him as a kind of demigod, or, at least, to use the past tense, worshipped him, since, as it turns out, Iago will be passed over by Othello in favor of Cassio. This is no trifling matter and should not be underestimated, for it is the inciting event that sets all else in motion, and the reversal of which almost bookends the play. But before beginning with Act 1, there is a technique that Shakespeare employs throughout the play that modifies the overall tone of the play that should be addressed, and that is inference. At the beginning of several scenes throughout the play, the audience happens upon a set of characters as they are conversing about some urgent matter. It could be Othello simply telling an officer to make ready for inspection, Desdemona reassuring Cassio after what must have been a more lengthy conversation, or Iago, as the play begins, explaining further to Roderigo that Othello has chosen Michael Cassio over himself. These instances, among others, are not accidental but premeditated on the author's part that encourages us to suspect that the events that preceded their dialogue are important to the overall play. In this way, we infer meaning and imbue the characters with certain attributes, such as greater status, that complement what we are currently hearing. We also get a stronger sense of what's at stake and a stronger sense of the character's importance to the situation and the play. Othello is one such character whose magnitude is amplified by this technique, for he is often either the subject of the conversation or a character in the conversation. Thusly, we are encouraged to place Othello upon a heroic platform, just as Iago and Desdemona have, so that his eventual topple is that much more tragic. Now, let's get started with William Shakespeare's Othello for iHearShakespeare. Act 1, Scene 1 begins on a street in Venice. We discover Iago complaining to Roderigo about how Othello has given a promotion to Michael Cassio rather than himself. Iago tips his hand regarding the nature of his own deceptive character when he declares, "I am not what I am." These two rather off-putting characters are on their way to wake Brabantio, a political figure of the town, in order to inform him of the fact that his daughter has eloped with Othello. "Your heart is burst," cries Iago to Brabantio. "You have lost half your soul. Even now, very now, an old black ram is tupping your white ewe." After Brabantio has worked himself into a frenzy over the news, Iago conveniently takes his leave of the scene, stating that "it is not meet nor wholesome to my place to be produced against the Moor." This, of course, leaves Brabantio and Roderigo as a duo to take action to find and apprehend Othello. As I mentioned earlier, Iago's being passed over for promotion by Othello, who favored Michael Cassio, is no trifling matter. Iago cannot tolerate what has happened, and so will be as the two-faced Janus and pretend to care about the Moor, but only to his advantage. "I am not what I am," declares Iago. Henceforth, Iago will carve his way throughout the play as a skilled improviser, compulsive liar, and avid nihilist. Shakespeare allows Iago to score winnings throughout the play by drawing no other characters who can compete with Iago's intellect and talents. There is no Hamlet to put Iago in his place, there is no Falstaff to silence the imp, there is no Rosalind to dismiss him. Further, there is no clown or fool to confound Iago's efforts, since Shakespeare keeps them away. Iago poisons Othello's minds against his wife, and so, without spilling blood, topples the Colossus. Whereas Othello's battlefield has always been on land with readily identifiable enemies, Iago's battlefield is within the mind of one of the greatest warriors Venice has known. Scene 2 opens with Iago conveying the former incidents to Othello in a way that would show Iago loyal and supportive to Othello. Iago says that Brabantio spoke such scurvy and provoking terms against your honor, and further warned that he will divorce you or put upon you what restraint or grievance the law, with all his might to enforce it on, will give him cable. Their conversation is interrupted by Cassio and other officers who have been sent by the Duke to bring Othello to an emergency meeting, but before he can leave, Roderigo and Brabantio enter with their own agenda for Othello. Brabantio demands that Othello be taken away as a prisoner. Othello deflects the senator's command by saying that he and the senator have been called to an emergency convocation by the Duke, who holds more authority than either of them. Brabantio suspends his order for the moment, but assures everyone that he will bring his grievance against Othello to the Duke himself. In Scene 3, we find the Venetian Senate deliberating the imminent attack on Cyprus by the Turks. The Duke is prepared to send Othello to meet the attack when Brabantio arrives and complains that his daughter has been taken away from him by Othello by means of witchcraft. Othello encourages the men to bring forth Desdemona, and she will say how pure their love is. But before she arrives, Othello explains that upon Brabantio's invitation, he has visited Brabantio's house many times and recounted his tales of battles and escapades to Desdemona, who listened attentively. When Desdemona makes her entrance, she articulates her duty as daughter to Brabantio and wife to Othello so eloquently that Brabantio relinquishes his anger and sanctions their union with all his heart. The matter settled, Brabantio, Othello, and the Duke continue their discussion of the Turkish threat to Cyprus, and the Duke orders Othello to go to Cyprus. Desdemona implores the Duke to allow her to accompany her husband. After all, the newlyweds have yet to consummate their marriage. The Duke places the decision upon Othello as to whether or not Desdemona will follow him to battle. Othello decides that Desdemona will be escorted to Cyprus by Iago and his wife Emilia on a ship that will leave after himself. It is Brabantio who plants the first seed that Desdemona may not be trustworthy as he departs, saying, "Look to her, Moor, if thou hast eyes to see. She has deceived her father, and may thee." The act concludes with Iago persuading Roderigo to come with him to Cyprus, where they will both exact revenge upon the Moor. Here concludes Act 1 of Othello for I Hear Shakespeare. In Scene 1 of Act 2, the action moves to Cyprus, where we find the Venetian governor, Montano, discussing the possibility that the recent storm may have destroyed the Turkish fleet, and there may be no battle after all. Cassio arrives and confirms that the Turkish fleet is indeed destroyed, and admits that Othello's ship is yet to be found. Desdemona, Iago, Emilia, and Roderigo next arrive at the Venetian encampment. Desdemona, who is surely searching the crowd for Othello, is pegged as being speechless by Iago before she can properly greet Cassio. This moment allows Iago to banter with Emilia and Desdemona about the differences between men and women. Iago, as you would expect, is rather misogynistic in his comments. When Cassio agrees with Desdemona that Iago is offensive in his speech, Iago strikes upon a simple plan to disrupt the newly married couple. Iago must convince Roderigo that Desdemona is secretly in love with Cassio. Roderigo must pick a fight with Cassio which will disgrace and remove the newly promoted lieutenant and allow for Roderigo to woo Desdemona. And Roderigo, who will do anything to be close to Desdemona, will agree. But before Iago communicates his plan to Roderigo, Othello arrives and greets his new bride affectionately. They exit. Iago seals the plot with Roderigo, then turns to the audience and makes plain the poisonous nature of his plans. In a very brief Scene 2, a herald reads a proclamation by Othello which allows all military personnel to be off duty until 11 at night, so that they may enjoy themselves as they like. Scene 3 begins with Othello reminding Cassio that, while the other men are enjoying themselves, they should still act as role models and act honorably. Othello exits and Iago enters, but before Othello exits, he says to Desdemona, "Come, my dear love, the purchase made, the fruits are to ensue. That profit's yet to come between me and you. Othello, of course, means to consummate the marriage. Now free from Othello's gaze, Iago coaxes Cassio into drinking wine, the latter of whom admits that he need only drink a little to be quite drunk. Cassio nevertheless allows himself to be persuaded by Iago, and by the time he is to report to his post, he is very drunk. Iago sends Roderigo to pick a fight with Cassio. Roderigo's efforts are successful, for in only a few short moments, Cassio appears chasing after Roderigo. Cassio's unprofessional behavior is witnessed by Montano, who tries to part the men only to be wounded by Cassio. Roderigo rings a bell at Iago's command, which wakes Othello. Othello reprimands both Cassio and Montano for their behavior. Iago seems to be the only one capable of speaking coherently in these moments, and so unfolds how the night unraveled as it did. Othello demotes Cassio and praises Iago. An alarmed Desdemona appears, but is soon escorted away by Othello, who will also attend to the wounded Montano. Iago, alone with Cassio, prods him on what exactly happened. Cassio can't quite explain why he got so angry. He only knows that he has lost his good reputation. Iago suggests that Cassio go secretly to Desdemona and enlist her help to regain his post and his reputation. Cassio sees hope with this plan and exits. In soliloquy, Iago describes how he will turn Desdemona's virtue into pitch, and out of her goodness make the net that shall enmesh them all. Roderigo makes a brief appearance and confesses that he is almost penniless in following Iago to Cyprus. Iago convinces Roderigo to be patient and see what happens. Iago next adds a coda to his plotting and surmises how he will make Othello witness and misconstrue Cassio's business with Desdemona. Here concludes Act 2 of Othello for I Hear Shakespeare. Scene 1 of Act 3 begins with a group of musicians hired by Cassio to play before Othello's headquarters in the hopes of setting a romantic mood. A clown also serves as intermediary between the musicians and Cassio. Speaking with Cassio, Iago consents to have his wife, Emilia, help Cassio gain private conversation with Desdemona, and Iago assures Cassio that he will draw Othello away to ensure privacy. Scene 2 depicts Othello going about his military duties and preparing for inspection of the fortress. Scene 3 shows Emilia, Cassio, and Desdemona wrapping up their conversation, and Desdemona giving Cassio her assurance that all will be mended between Cassio and her husband. Iago and Othello enter at a distance and observe the threesome. Cassio makes a hasty departure, and Iago takes the opportunity to suggest that Cassio behaved in a guilty way on sight of Othello. Desdemona actively crosses to Othello and implores him to call Cassio back and make amends with him. Othello makes excuses for why he doesn't want to see him, which only frustrates Desdemona. This, of course, only makes Othello more impatient and irritable by the whole situation. This is a sort of domestic battle in which Othello doesn't know how to fight, and so can only become frustrated and aggravated. Desdemona exits, and Iago begins to exacerbate Othello's irritable mood by working the notion that Othello may have reason to be jealous of Cassio, and finally concludes, "Oh, beware, my lord, of jealousy. It is the green-eyed monster." Iago departs, and Othello begins a meditation on human nature, infidelity, and the possibility that Desdemona no longer loves him because he is a Moor and older. As he concludes his soliloquy, he seems to have gained control of his mood, his temper, and his outlook on marriage and her fidelity when he affirms, "If she be false, heaven mocked itself. I'll not believe it." Desdemona enters and notices his weakened disposition and dabs his forehead with the handkerchief that was Othello's first gift to her. He brushes her hand away, and she drops the handkerchief, which, when Desdemona and Othello exit, Emilia quickly snatches. Emilia describes how Iago had pestered her to steal that handkerchief many times. Now that she has it, she'll have the embroidery copied and give it to Iago, who will use it to further implicate Cassio. Emilia exits. Othello enters and demands that Iago provide ocular proof that Desdemona has been unfaithful. Iago states that he heard Cassio mumble in his sleep, "Sweet Desdemona, let us hide our loves." Iago next states that he has seen Cassio with the handkerchief that Othello once gave to Desdemona. Now certain of his wife's infidelity, Othello kneels and formally swears vengeance. Iago likewise kneels and pledges to assist the wronged Othello by vowing to kill Cassio and help Othello kill Desdemona. At the top of scene 4, Shakespeare offers a reprieve from the tragedy by having a clown converse with Desdemona. She questions him on the whereabouts of Cassio, stating that she has arranged what should be a favorable confab between Cassio and Othello. Desdemona next expresses her concern to Emilia at losing the handkerchief that Othello once gave her. Emilia asks if Othello is of a jealous nature, to which Desdemona replies, "Who, he? I think the son where he was born drew all such humours from him." Othello next enters and, after dodging Desdemona's request for him to meet with Cassio, demands she produce the handkerchief that he once gave her. Othello warns Desdemona that the handkerchief was sewn by an Egyptian woman who wove magic into its fibers, which held that the woman who lost or re-gifted the handkerchief would be damned in the eyes of her lover. Desdemona insists that it is not lost but will not go and fetch it. Othello exits, and Emilia, noting his immature behavior, once again asks if Othello is of a jealous nature. Desdemona replies, "I never saw this before." Iago and Cassio enter the scene, and Iago offers to go learn more of Othello's angry disposition on behalf of the others. Their suspicion is that some sort of state business has put Othello into ill spirits. With hope and resolve, Desdemona and Emilia set off to find Othello, leaving Cassio to speak with Bianca, a courtesan who has just arrived. Bianca chastises Cassio for not visiting her more often and, upon discovering the handkerchief, becomes jealous that he may have found another lover. Cassio says that he knows not where the handkerchief came from, but he'd be pleased if she'd have the stitching copied. At his request, she departs, and Cassio is left alone in the hopes that Othello will be visiting him soon. Here concludes Act 3 of Othello, for iHearShakespeare. Scene 1 of Act 4 holds Iago further exacerbating Othello's worry and irritation over the relationship between Desdemona and Cassio. Iago's insinuating words are enough to put Othello into a kind of trance, during which Cassio enters and exits. Othello recovers his senses, and Iago says that he will arrange a meeting where Othello can overhear Cassio confess his affair with Desdemona to Iago. Othello hides. Cassio returns, and Iago asks Cassio not about Desdemona as Othello thinks, but Bianca, who, you'll remember, is a courtesan. Othello interjects commentary throughout their dialogue, all to the detriment of Desdemona. Bianca returns, convinced that the handkerchief Cassio gave her to copy is from some other woman, and states that she'll not have anything to do with it. Othello now believes that Cassio has given Desdemona's handkerchief to a courtesan. Bianca and Cassio exit. Othello contemplates how he'll kill Cassio and resolves that Desdemona is damned tonight, for she shall not live. Iago offers to kill Cassio as a trumpet sounds, and Lodovico, Desdemona, and others appear. Lodovico brings a letter from Venice calling Othello back and placing Cassio in command. When Desdemona, who is naturally pleased by the news, exclaims, "My sweet Othello," Othello strikes her. Desdemona exits, offering, "I will not stay to offend you." Lodovico questions Othello's mental disposition, to which Iago responds, "He is much changed." Scene 2 begins with Othello questioning Emilia as to the nature of Desdemona's relationship with Cassio. She insists that she has witnessed nothing inappropriate. Othello demands that Emilia call forth Desdemona. When she appears, Othello accuses her and dismisses her denials. Othello storms out. Emilia reappears with Iago, and they try to comfort the stunned Desdemona. Desdemona pitifully asks for Iago's help with her estranged husband. Iago reassures her and sends the two women to supper as Roderigo enters. Roderigo seems to have figured out Iago when he says, "I do not find that thou dealest justly with me." Roderigo further complains that Desdemona is no closer to him as Iago had promised, and, perhaps even worse, Roderigo is almost penniless. Iago quickly explains that Othello is to be sent back to Venice along with Desdemona, and Cassio will be placed in command. This situation can be rectified, Iago assures, if Cassio is killed, so that Othello will have to remain in Cyprus and Desdemona within Roderigo's reach. The dull-witted and gullible Roderigo takes the bait and goes off with Iago to solidify the plot. Scene 3 begins with Othello, Lodovico, Desdemona, and Emilia present. Othello sends Desdemona to bed and insists that Emilia be dismissed while he takes a short walk with Lodovico. Othello and Lodovico exit while Desdemona prepares for the night. She seems to be aware that she will be killed this night, for she remembers a song called Willow that her mother's maid named Barbary used to sing. Desdemona and Emilia end the scene by having a hypothetical discussion as to whether or not they would be unfaithful to their respective husbands for any reward. Emilia suggests that to wrong her husband for something like the whole world is a great thing for a small vice, for it would make him a monarch. Desdemona affirms that she would not do such a thing, not even for the whole world. Here concludes Act 4 of Othello, for I Hear Shakespeare. Act 5, Scene 1 shows Iago putting Roderigo in place to attack Cassio. Iago hopes to kill two birds with one stone, for Roderigo may ask for his money and treasures back, and Cassio may disprove his lies. If the two kill each other, so much the better. In the clumsy attack that ensues, Roderigo is wounded by Cassio. Cassio is next wounded from behind by Iago, who quickly exits. Othello catches sight of the wounded Cassio and is pleased that Iago has kept his word. Othello exits as Gratiano and Lodovico enter to bear witness. During the confusion, Iago returns and pretends to be enraged over the scene and finishes off Roderigo with a sword. As Cassio begins to swoon, Bianca enters only to be implicated by Iago. Cassio is taken away for medical attention. Iago continues implicating Bianca, and Emilia enters. The scene concludes as Iago admits, "This is the night that either makes me or fordoes me quite." Scene 2 shows Othello near Desdemona's bed, halted in his plans by her exquisite beauty. Being so overwhelmed, he resolves to kill her without blemishing that beauty. Desdemona wakes, and he tells her to prepare for death. Desdemona pleads with him and asks him to summon Cassio, who will clear her of any wrongdoing. Othello points to the handkerchief as evidence of the affair between her and Cassio, and announces that Cassio cannot clear her, for he is dead. Cassio is in fact not dead, but Othello doesn't know that. Othello now misinterprets Desdemona's tears as tears shed for Cassio rather than tears of innocence, and, in a final rage, begins to smother her. Emilia appears, exclaiming that Roderigo has been killed by Cassio while simultaneously crying out that Desdemona is heavenly true. Not quite dead, Desdemona cries out that she is innocent. Othello says that he killed her because of her infidelity, which Emilia vehemently refutes. Emilia calls for help, and Montano, Gratiano, and Iago appear. Othello again points to the handkerchief as evidence, but Emilia explains how she found it and gave it to Iago, since he had often asked her to steal it. Furious, Iago stabs Emilia and flees the scene. Everyone exits, leaving Othello alone with the dead Desdemona and the dying Emilia, who begins to sing the Willow song that Desdemona sang before her death. Othello draws a sword that he had from Spain and begins to contemplate suicide. Montano, Lodovico, and Cassio enter, holding Iago hostage. Othello stabs Iago with the intention of only wounding him. Indeed, Othello contends, "I cannot kill thee. I'd have thee live, for in my sense 'tis happiness to die." The officers take Othello's weapon away. Othello says that he did everything out of honor, and further asks for Cassio's pardon. Lodovico shows Othello letters as evidence of Iago's guilt. Cassio explains that he simply found the handkerchief that once belonged to Desdemona in his bedchamber, and knew not how it got there. Lodovico explains that Othello must return to Venice for judgment, but to rest assured that Iago will be punished accordingly. Othello next asks that those present relate these incidents as they are, and speak of him as one that loved not wisely, but too well, and threw a pearl away richer than all his tribe. Upon this declaration, Othello stabs himself. The play concludes with Lodovico giving further assurance that justice will be served. Othello's stature is dimmed without war. It is all he has ever known, and it is the reason why Desdemona fell in love with him. In fact, it wasn't so much Othello the man that Desdemona fell in love with, but Othello the war god that she dedicated herself to. Othello's demise is set in a downward spiral when he marries Desdemona, takes her to an island that doesn't know Othello for his accomplishments, proves unwilling to consummate the marriage, is denied the promise of battle with the Turks by the forces of nature, and manipulated by a nihilistic genius. The characters of Iago and Desdemona borrow respectively from the vice and virtue characters of the morality plays, both fighting for control of Othello the hero. When Othello kills Desdemona in a fashion reminiscent of high opera, he kills love and trust in its purest form of virtue. For that moment, vice has won, but will, of course, suffer when Iago is betrayed by his wife, who reveals all at the cost of her own life. The character of Othello borrows from earlier hero characters and is further heightened, and thus further alienated, by being a Moor. In other words, by being a non-Venetian. In this way, Othello's character is more about an otherness that transcends the common man of Venice than about differences in race. Of course, one may argue that the differences are about race, but in doing so, offer a more reductive perspective on the play. Here concludes Act 5 of Othello for I Hear Shakespeare.